Hello. Dear participants in the seminar on cycling, it's a great pleasure to see such a great turnout for our first webinar on cycling that we hope will be the beginning of a series. Cycling is gaining traction in many places in the world as a safe and healthy way of transporting yourself. And in the Netherlands, using the bicycle is a normal way of transport for decades already. You have to imagine, in the Netherlands there are 17 million inhabitants, but 23 million of bicycles. And I myself, I'm a big fan of the bicycle. And I always say jokingly that children in the Netherlands, they learn how to bike before they learn how to walk. And you have to imagine that in the Netherlands, 75% of children in secondary school go to school by bike. And I think the fact that kids can use their bikes so easily to go to school, to visit friends, to go to their sports clubs, is a reason why the Netherlands always scores so high in UNICEF's survey on the happiness of children. But it's certainly not only children that make use of bikes. Grown-ups, elderly, use it to go to their work, to shop, to visit friends. And yes, we have a country where it's easy to use a bicycle because it's flat. And in our country, the amount of kilometers by bicycle is the same amount as the amount of kilometers that is spent on a train. And that's 15 billion kilometers. But I think also in hilly terrain nowadays with electric bicycles, the terrain can be conquered by the bike user. But one important thing is different, I think. In our country, 35,000 kilometers we have of segregated cycling tracks. For us, it's clear, to stimulate the bicycle, you have to plan and you have to invest. And we keep on doing that. And we may be convinced that it's good for ourselves, but we love to promote using the bicycle everywhere because we think using the bicycle as a normal way of transport helps us deal with challenges that we all face. Climate change, healthy lifestyle, and making transport affordable for many. I think in times of the pandemic, it's even more clear how important this is. So I'm very happy that we have been able to create this platform. And I'm very glad to see people from so many different backgrounds. I saw landscape architects, I saw representatives of NGOs, of municipalities, architects. It's really interesting to see how many people are involved in this. And indeed, Portugal doesn't start from scratch either. Portugal has a national strategy for active cycling mobility. There are plans to stimulate cycling for academics and for school children. And a big surprise to me actually is that Portugal has one of the biggest cycling producing industry in the world. It's the biggest in Europe. And last but not least, Lisbon is going to be a Velo city next year. The webinar will give hopefully answers to questions of why, what, and how. But I also hope not only that you get some answers, but that this webinar also creates a platform of people interested to together stimulate this, in my view and in my experience, fantastic means of transport. And with these words, I would like to give the floor to the moderator, Chris Brundtland from Dutch Cycling Embassy. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Chris Brundtland, and I am the Marketing and Communication Manager with the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We are very excited to have worked quite closely with the Netherlands Embassy in Lisbon on this event, and we have quite a great program put together for you this morning. So Just a brief introduction to our organization and what we do. The Dutch Cycling Embassy has been around for almost 10 years now. We're a public-private partnership between the national government here in the Netherlands and about 75 organizations that work internationally in the field of cycling. There are public organizations such as municipal governments, academic institutions like universities. There are also private consultants, transportation planners, engineers, and you can name many, many more. But they are all experts in this field of cycling and have been working in the field of cycling for a very long period of time. And our goal, our task is to help them export the knowledge and expertise that they have in their respective fields and help cities around the world become more cycle friendly. We have two such members who will be speaking to you today, along with a third Portuguese speaker to give a bit of a local perspective. Our work up to this point has been twofold. We do a lot of study tours where we host international delegations here in the Netherlands. We take them on bicycle tours of cities that are similar to the context they came from and show them the streets the way they are, the way people use them, and then also put them in a classroom setting to help them understand why it is that way, why it's so important, and how those streets got to be that way. And then inversely, we also take teams of Dutch experts to cities around the world and conduct Think Bike workshops on specific challenges to address specific challenges that they're experiencing in their city. As you can imagine, things have changed significantly in the world of COVID, where we're not doing so much international travel. We're not able to host groups here, and a lot of the work we do now has switched to a more digital format. But that's not to say we're not busier than ever, working with all kinds of places around the world as they now struggle with their corona-related mobility challenges. So as I've said, we have three speakers for you lined up this morning. Here is a quick look at our program. We just want to remind you to submit your questions in the chat function below, in English ideally, please, so that we can go through some of them at the end of the session. And I also just want to remind you that this session is going to be recorded. So everything is on the record, and we will be distributing the YouTube link and the slideshows to everyone who's registered with an email address today, so that you have a record whether you were able to tune in or not. So with that, we're going to get started with our first speaker, Bernardo Pereira, who is an architect and a sustainable mobility consultant based in Lisbon. And I will hand him hosting duties so that he can share his screen and get started.
Bom dia, good morning. I will share here my presentation. Okay, first I'll give a quick run through in English. I'm going to do a quick diagnosis of Portugal's urban cycling context with the first 6 slides, and then I will do 5 slides on policy and planning and 9 slides on simple high-impact measures that we've done here in Portugal, or that other technicians have done, and that are achieved in this country, that have been achieved. So I'll start now, and I'll run over into Portuguese. Então, vou falar sobre como a bicicleta pode mudar as cidades portuguesas. E primeiro que queria falar era o que é que nós temos na Europa, que digamos que é o continente ao qual pertencemos, e se formos ao centro da Europa Ocidental, que é a nossa região, a nossa parte da Europa, se formos um bocadinho a norte, vemos que aqui estamos a ver um mapa de o que é roxo, são as redes, são as ciclovias que interligam os territórios, e as cidades e as vilas. E temos na Holanda, no Países Baixos, mas também na Alemanha, até a República Checa, partes da Polónia, Áustria, Suíça, até a Inglaterra, que é bastante atrasada, Dinamarca. Vemos aqui ligações entre as cidades. Se olharmos para Portugal, a realidade muda radicalmente. Isto é à mesma escala, estamos aqui exatamente com a mesma escala, e só se encontra 4 ligações que apanham vários municípios. Não são entre capitais de distrito, não são dentro das áreas metropolitanas. Temos muito pouca rede ciclável a interligar as várias zonas urbanas. Não quer dizer que depois dentro de cada município, aí sim há casos concretos, como Lisboa, como a Mortosa, onde sim há ligações, mas não há nas áreas metropolitanas e muitas destas que se vê aqui, estas 4, 3 são ecopistas, não são propriamente ciclovias. Isto no terreno leva-nos a ver situações muito precárias. As bicicletas acabam por usar passeios. Isto aqui é uma estrada nacional que liga 3 municípios que são entre os mais densos e maiores do país. E esta estrada nacional, à saída da capital, as bicicletas andam no passeio e os peões têm que partilhar, mas todo o espaço, olharmos, falta de espaço para o automóvel não há. E isto cria situações desagradáveis. Também dentro das zonas urbanas temos zonas 30, claro, mas se há tráfego de atravessamento e há volumes de tráfego e se não são respeitadas as velocidades, os ciclistas acabam por usar os passeios, que é o que se vê aqui. E aqui a entrada da rota europeia Eurovelo 1, quando entra a Eurovelo 1 em Portugal, no Algarve, é isto. Isto é o que temos, situações muito precárias, grande perigo, muito desagradáveis. Por isso as pessoas acabam por ter medo de usar a bicicleta. Se é isto que queremos, estes são os impactos, não só na bicicleta, mas o perigo rodoviário invade todo o espaço. As pessoas com mais vulneráveis, crianças, ir para a escola, ir a pé é uma aventura, muitas vezes, em muitos municípios do país. E para pessoas com deficiência, então, situações aflitivas. E depois o limite, que é isto, não é? Temos muitos mortos por causa de ferimentos, situações de perigo das pessoas que se arriscam a usar a bicicleta, mesmo quando cumprem todas as regras. Dá nisto porquê? Porque o carro é priorizado, o tráfego é que é priorizado. Pois há quem diga, mas é que em Portugal nunca se usou a bicicleta. Mas se nós olharmos para a realidade de Lisboa, da área metropolitana de Lisboa, havia bicicletas na via, como se voltou a ver durante o Covid. O Porto era uma cidade que tinha imensas bicicletas. Vê-se aqui mais bicicletas do que carro na Ponta Dom Luís. As áreas metropolitanas, aqui há a sair de Lisboa, a estrada de Odivelas. Mas porquê é que desapareceu a bicicleta? Bem, o planeamento foi todo, isto é o planeamento da Junta Autónoma de Estradas de 1965. Era tudo a pensar no carro e a bicicleta, aqui em 1950, tinha 40% das deslocações, era para esquecer. Foi omitida, posta de parte, não era levada a sério. Então as infraestruturas não incluíam a bicicleta. Aqui, a Nacional 6, a mesma Nacional 6, como foi feito, mais bicicletas do carro, há ali uma, mas não há condições para a bicicleta. E mesmo quando havia, a Ponta Rábida foi construída com 2 ciclovias unidirecionais, 1,70 m de largura cada. Essas ciclovias acabaram por ser removidas em 1993, 30 anos depois de ser feitas, para alargar o espaço para o automóvel, sem dar opções à bicicleta e a prejudicar os peões. Então, situações precárias novamente, que é a ciclovia da Via Rápida, da Via Rápida da Costa da Caparica. Este padrão aconteceu por toda a Europa e Portugal tem uma média que é uma média europeia, mais alta do que muitas das cidades europeias que até são de relativamente alto uso da bicicleta. É esta linha azul que se vê aqui neste gráfico. E mesmo no eixo mais automobilizado do país, que é a Estrada Nacional 6, que foi pensada sobretudo para os automóveis, havia bastantes bicicletas, mais do que havia em Lyon, do que havia na Basileia, ou até do que havia em Estocolmo, numa certa altura, entre 1950 e 65. Só que houve esta queda, como em todas estas cidades, porque apostou-se foi no automóvel, mas enquanto estas cidades começaram a recuperar, quando começaram a investir novamente, a incluir a bicicleta nos seus planos, nas suas políticas, em Portugal esses planos e políticas nunca se concretizaram a nível nacional ou na maior parte dos municípios. Por isso manteve-se baixo. Fomos de 40% de utilização de bicicleta para 0,5%. E assim nos mantivemos. Por isso mesmo que haja a mensagem política da bicicleta em campanhas, aqui é uma campanha autárquica em 1982, vemos aqui o Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, o atual Presidente da República, outras figuras políticas, Helena Rosete, António Capuz. A bicicleta estava lá para eventos concretos, mas depois para concretizar em políticas não houve essa concretização. Então, há quem diga que não há dinheiro, mas este PDM, que foi dos últimos aprovados em Portugal, é de 2015, nós o que vemos aqui é um PDM, um plano de investimento num PDM do município português, aposta 179 milhões de euros para a infraestrutura rodoviária, para o carro, 200 mil euros para a bicicleta e o peão em conjunto. Por isso não estranha que a repartição modal também vá neste sentido. Por isso a bicicleta continua omitida, esquecida, da maior parte dos municípios. Enquanto assim for, também não vai crescer. Pelo menos não vai crescer nas condições normais. Agora, as cidades portuguesas que já conseguiram atingir referências europeias, Torres Vedras, com Green Leaf Award, primeiro prémio galardão europeu de uma cidade portuguesa do ambiente. Lisboa, capital verde europeia, isto é importantíssimo. Ambas apostaram na bicicleta. Não podiam ocultar a bicicleta, não podiam omitir a bicicleta. E a bicicleta aí faz parte dos programas, como faz parte de todos os programas europeus de mobilidade urbana sustentável, os programas cívicos, os programas da Semana da Mobilidade. Não se pode ignorar a bicicleta. E este é o caminho, por isso sim que é levado a sério. E o Velocity, que vamos ter em Lisboa no próximo ano, é um evento de políticas de planeamento importantíssimo. Vêm os melhores especialistas, comunicadores, ativistas, políticos, decisores, interessados na bicicleta, de organismos e de municípios de todo o mundo. Isso sim que é um elemento a levar a sério. Pois há quem diga que em Portugal não há apoio. Só que, se formos analisar os orçamentos participativos de Lisboa, durante vários anos, foram as ciclovias, foi a bicicleta, foi estacionamento para as bicicletas, rampas para bicicletas nas escadas, medidas para a bicicleta que ganharam os orçamentos participativos, muitos dos quais foram vindo a ser implementados com o crescimento da rede ciclável. Já em Oeiras, os últimos 2 orçamentos participativos foram vitórias contundentes da bicicleta, fortíssimas vitórias da bicicleta, grande apoio popular da bicicleta. Infelizmente, nenhuma destas propostas foi implementada. Mas existem massas críticas, existem passeios, existem muitos eventos. Os cidadãos mobilizam, eles querem andar de bicicleta, querem ter esta hipótese de mobilidade, querem também poder andar a pé em segurança, querem apostar na mobilidade ativa. E as pessoas também já estão um pouco fartas. Quando há atropelamentos, existe isto foi este verão. Este verão apareceram centenas de ativistas a manifestar que a via pública tem que ser redistribuída, tem que ser inclusiva para todos. Peões, bicicletas, para toda a gente. Não pode ser este período dominado pela ditadura do automóvel. Pois há quem diga que não há utilizadores, mas a verdade é que nos poucos sítios onde há rede ciclável, onde há ligações, sim que há utilizadores. É verdade que a bicicleta é mais silenciosa, é menos impositiva, não se vê, não polui, não chateia tanto como um automóvel, como um veículo grande, um caminhão. Não sobe tanto como um comboio, não ocupa tanto território, mas a verdade é que ela está lá. E se olharmos com cuidado, ela está lá. Mesmo nos sítios com situações precárias. As praias, as bicicletas estacionam deste modo precário, mas estão lá. É preciso ver e olhar. Mas há quem também refira que não há espaço. É muito usada esta desculpa. Não temos espaço. E aqui vemos um caso de uma das cidades mais difíceis para enfrentar esse problema, Lisboa, e de facto o automóvel ocupa e ocupava grande parte da cidade, do espaço público da cidade. Mas há maneiras de dar resposta a isto. Umas mais complicadas, outras muito simples. E temos estes mesmos espaços hoje em dia, de repente há espaço. Há imenso espaço. Aqui há espaço para uma ciclovia, há espaço para passeios, há espaço para quiosques, há espaço para muita coisa. Obras mais complexas, à esquerda aqui o Saldanha, obras muito simples, à direita aqui a Rua dos Bacalhoeiros, excelente exemplo de como rapidamente se resolve o problema e ganha-se qualidade de vida, qualidade de ambiente, começa-se a ligar os espaços pedonais e cicláveis. E mesmo sem tirar o carro. Aqui um caso de uma rua que era uma rua de atravessamento, que agora é uma rua de coexistência, não está definida como tal, mas funciona como tal. A bicicleta consegue andar nos 2 sentidos, o peão também, e como não há tráfego de atravessamento e reduz a velocidade, introduz medidas de acalmia de tráfego, ganha logo alguma qualidade e começa-se a ver miúdos a aparecer no seu caminho para casa, da escola. Outras medidas, isto no centro de Cascais, tiraram aqui os automóveis, criou-se espaço, os restaurantes ocuparam, os bares, os cafés, começaram a aparecer bicicletas, estão aqui estacionadas 2, começaram a aparecer mais peões, ganham-se qualidade de vida. E isto não tem preço. As crianças, os idosos, as famílias ganham, é um ganho que não tem preço. Isto poder jogar na rua, estar à vontade. Depois há a questão económica. Mas a rede ciclável não gera dinheiro para a economia. Então não gera. Se for bem feito, consegue-se recuperar espaço, e depois é importante interligá-lo também, recuperar espaço, e aqui onde podemos estacionar 2 ou 3 automóveis, temos todas estas mesas. As pessoas também ganham os negócios, os restaurantes, as lojas podem expandir para fora, e nesta altura da Covid é importantíssimo. Ganha-se mesmo aqui umas respostas muito simples, muito eficazes. Isto, em Lisboa, este programa tem sido muito eficaz. Não há quem diga que não há como. E se olharmos para Lisboa, com quem nós temos trabalhado, Lisboa começou tarde, para a capital europeia muito atrasada. Primeira ciclovia 4 km em 2001. Uma cidade que se dizia que era das 7 colinas que era impossível. Em menos de 20 anos, Lisboa começou a recuperar espaços públicos, a ligá-los entre eles com ciclovias. Também teve um programa pedonal interessante. Zonas 30, redução de velocidade e agora os azuis, que são as ruas abertas, aquelas medidas simples e eficazes. Estas são aquelas que são permanentes. E isto é importantíssimo. E é importantíssimo estas ligações entre os locais e estar tudo em rede. Lisboa está a conseguir mudar de paradigma, já lá chegaremos. Há quem diga que não resulta. Aqui está uma ciclovia instantânea, feita muito rapidamente, alguns dias, e começou-se a ver não só os utilizadores habituais, como este commuter que vê-se aqui, mas lá ao fundo está-se a ver pessoas a deslocarem-se que talvez não se iam meter naquela avenida como ela era antes, que é uma autêntica autoestrada. Também começa-se a ver, estas são obras que nós temos acompanhado e consultado para fazê-las. Esta aqui é uma ciclovia que tem ganho, é a continuação da Avenida Brasil e tem ganho novos tipos de utilizadores, que é uma bicicleta de carga, que era coisa que não se via. E depois temos aqui, este é um projeto nosso que concretizámos em Quarteira e simplesmente fomos da via que tinha mais sinistralidade, tinha 2 pontos mais mortíferos que todo o Concelho de Alegre, um concelho grande. Reduziu a sinistralidade e eles puseram um contador lá em maio e vê-se que aumentou o uso de modo sustentado da bicicleta. Aqui vê-se uma utilizadora que eu duvido que queria ir para ali quando aquilo parecia uma autoestrada. É importante, é muito importante perceber os resultados, porque quem está parado no automóvel não vê as bicicletas, elas são silenciosas, ou são miúdos pequenos que não aparecem. Por isso, estes contadores são muito importantes. Comunicar, como este expositor, por exemplo, que está em Carcavelos, Concelho de Cascais, comunicar, mas também deve ser comunicado online, deve ser comunicado em sites e nas redes sociais para as pessoas perceberem que de facto há utilizadores. Mesmo em ciclovias como esta, onde muitos utilizadores vão por outros caminhos. Uma ciclovia um bocado desconexa, mas os contadores são muito importantes. E uma coisa muito interessante é que durante o Covid, no último ano, Portugal foi dos países, de acordo com quem registra todos estes contadores, foi dos países que teve maior crescimento no mundo do uso da bicicleta. E não estranha, porque desceu o tráfego. Por isso, agora como é que nós vamos manter isto? Portugal aqui é o segundo de todos estes que tinham este tipo de contadores. Mas como é que se mantém isto? Isto é importante, é manter, não é ficar por aqui, não é por causa que desapareceu o tráfego. Ele pode voltar, então vamos planear para isso. Lisboa, que tem planeado para isso, tem desde 2009, começou a fazer a ciclovia Ribeirinha, tenho aqui contagens que tenho feito em movimento, houve um aumento de 2100% até o ano passado, atualmente até pode ser um pouco maior. Nós estamos a trabalhar com Lisboa desde 2016 e fizemos o projeto do plano, tivemos a acompanhar o projeto, projetar, do projeto piloto do Planalto Central da cidade e este ligado à ciclovia do Eixo Central que foi realizada nessa altura, começa-se logo a ver um aumento, não é? A rede ciclável também em baixo temos os valores do tamanho da rede ciclável total da cidade. Começa a haver logo um aumento do uso da bicicleta, as bicicletas partilhadas ainda deram um maior aumento e a cidade conseguiu, eu acho que tem conseguido pôr a bicicleta na agenda e na cultura da rua. E vê-se isso, vê-se jovens, vê-se idosos, vê-se as pessoas a usarem a bicicleta, a deslocarem-se. Depois há o seguimento que é importante fazer. Aqui isto são as tais contagens que faço entre o Passo de Arcos e o Terreiro do Passo e o Terreiro do Passo até o Lumiar, para apanhar zonas da área metropolitana e periféricas. E vê-se que também há um crescimento sustentado desde 2016. Há uma tendência de crescimento. Houve um grande decréscimo no lockdown, mas depois houve um aumento brutal depois do lockdown. E o que é curioso é que isto também fora de Lisboa, excepcionalmente, porque estes valores são altos por o que se fez em Lisboa. Fora de Lisboa, que eram baixos, subiram muito. Mas depois voltámos a perder esses valores e a razão que perdemos esses valores tem a ver com o tráfego, o regresso do tráfego. O aumento dos valores foi o regresso às escolas secundárias, em maio, via-se miúdos de bicicleta, pessoas a deslocarem-se para a praia, deslocações de lazer, mas que antes as pessoas não arriscavam e que pararam de arriscar quando voltou o tráfego. Isto é confirmado também pelos valores robustos que estamos a ter, de modo sustentado, no contador digital que existe na Avenida do Clável. Também há um aumento do uso da bicicleta. E isto é importante registar isto. E estas mudanças pode-se fazer com medidas muito simples. E para fechar, isto é uma medida na Mortosa, um concelho pequeno, mas conseguiu meter numa estrada nacional, nas Bernas, ciclovias unidirecionais, balizou, pintou, liga até aos concelhos vizinhos, depois os concelhos vizinhos é que não têm continuado esta rede, e é o que falta. Mas isto são medidas simples, rápidas e de grande impacto. também pode-se fazer, além das outras mencionadas. Por isso, queria agradecer também.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. I'm going to hand the floor directly over to our next speaker, who is Jason Colbeck. Jason is an urban design and mobility consultant based in Delft in the Netherlands for a private consultant named Mobicon.
Good morning, everyone. Is everyone able to see my screen? Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so thank you everyone for joining. As Chris said, my name's Jason. I'm an urban design and mobility consultant at Mobicon, which is a Dutch international consultancy. We are based in Delft in the Netherlands, as well as having offices in Zwolle and Den Bosch, and we also have offices in North America, in Ottawa, Canada, and in Durham, North Carolina in the US. So today I'm going to be talking about having a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the Dutch principles of traffic calming and mobility network planning and design. So I will be focusing on the network level planning of mobility networks in the Netherlands, the principles of sustainable safety, when to separate and mix different modes, and the behavior and traffic psychology that has informed these choices. I'll then be talking about how that maps onto the street level and design choices that you see in the Netherlands that create the environments that we experience here. So first of all, to reiterate a bit of what Bernardo was talking about in the Portuguese context, in the Netherlands experienced very, very similar issues as much of the world in the post-war era with the rise of car use. This culminated in the early 70s with a huge rise in traffic-related fatalities, and the Netherlands, like much of the world, experienced other problems, including the oil crisis in the early 70s and a significant rise in traffic-related deaths of children as well. So a lot of these things culminated in a growing movement for change, and as a result, throughout the 80s and into the 90s, the concept of sustainable safety was developed and implemented in 1992. So I'm not going to go too much into sustainable safety because it could form a webinar in itself. But one of the things that sustainable safety developed was an idea of the functionality of roads, and helped establish how roads and mobility networks in general were planned and laid out. So one of the key principles of sustainable safety is the idea that all traffic-related fatalities are unethical and preventable, that people make mistakes and that people even break the rules, and that this shouldn't cause death and serious injury to users. And the idea that speed is such a determining factor, and that the higher the speed, the greater the probability of death, and the need therefore to reduce speed especially in urban areas. So this helps to inform when to separate different modes of traffic and when to mix. So focusing on urban areas in particular, this means that speed limits are established for different types of roads, and that these are categorized generally by into access roads, which are typically residential streets, distributor roads, and through roads. And through roads tend to be the strategic road network and motorways. So I'm not going to talk about too much about those, but focus on distributor roads, which are can be fairly high traffic roads that that allow people to get from A to B and to access a smaller network of residential streets. And they typically have, in the Netherlands, you typically see cycle tracks along them because speeds are high enough and traffic volumes are high enough to justify separation. Whereas access roads, typically residential streets, the speed should be low enough and volumes reduced to the point where separation isn't considered necessary, and you'd have a mixed profile. So one of the ideas that this is based on is Hans Monderman's study, which demonstrated the behavior of traffic users in the system, in which people are willing to travel at a certain distance at set speeds. So here you can see that drivers are willing to drive for 6 minutes, for up to 6 minutes on access roads at a low speed until they start to feel the need to speed up. And that has informed the way that the mobility network is laid out, with distributor roads being a set distance apart, and that has informed the mesh width of the network. So very quickly, to put that into context, Mobicon helped conduct a study with the city of Gouda in the Netherlands to determine its mobility network. So here you can see that you've got a pedestrian core in the center surrounded by a low speed environment that around the center that does allow traffic. And then in green, you can see the areas of residential development surrounding the city center, between which you would have movement patterns. So here we have an overlay of the bicycle network with regional primary and secondary cycle routes, and then the road network for motor vehicles, which, as you can see, is significantly reduced. So cars can travel on through routes and distribution routes throughout the city, but they don't have as many options. And if I go back, you can see that at times the cycle network and the car network might coincide. Sometimes they might not. Where they do coincide, the speed and traffic volume of those roads are likely to determine the design, and I'll talk about the design in a bit more detail shortly. So to put it in a local context, this is a particular section of route in Utrecht, which shows where in blue is the car route and in red is the cycle route. And you can see that at this point, the two don't coincide at this for this section. And the two routes have been unraveled, which actually means that on the street, the cycle aspect of that route, in this case, is a Fietsstraat or a cycle street. And then just to recap the three types of road functionality here, just to give an idea of what they might look like. So we talked about through roads as being the strategic road network. The distributor roads are roads along which there could be a significant volume of car traffic, and therefore cycle tracks have been used. And then access roads, which are smaller residential streets. In the image shown, that's in Delft, and it shows an example of a Wonen or living street or home zone. So when we get down to the street level, I'm going to talk about different material choices, different aspects of the street that enable the creation of the sorts of streets that are typical of the Netherlands. So one of the key features is when we're talking about access roads, these are streets that should be available for people to use, of all different ages and abilities. And a key consideration is to remove the through traffic and ensure that that is on the distributor roads and through network. So there are lots of ways to do this. The example shown is a simple modal filter using bollards. Modal filters can come in a variety of types, shapes, and sizes. In this case, it's really simple, just bollards placed along the sidewalk. But it's also possible to create real amazing spaces from them. So this is similarly a modal filter that prevents through traffic, and in this case, it's been used to create a usable space with with playgrounds and outside seating. So lots of different tools in the designer's toolbox for this. So not just modal filters, but in order to reduce speed, you could use a variety of methods. Diverters to reduce through traffic. You can reduce the width. You can have horizontal and vertical deflection. So it might be the humble speed bump. And just an example again of ONERF in Delft, which shows how the entire design of the street is really to reduce the speed of the traffic that is there, bearing in mind that there shouldn't be a lot of traffic in the first place. And if all this fails, put a tree in the middle of it. So I've already touched upon width slightly, but width really is everything. So a feature of Dutch streets that's really noticeable is the fact that they can be quite narrow, and widths are often prescribed. And a key consideration is to make sure that the width ensures low speeds. So lots of streets have significant volumes of traffic, and car traffic volume is not a problem. So it just determines a couple of different street types. So here you can see that this street design can handle up to 10,000 vehicles a day. That's too many for mixing, and therefore cycle traffic and pedestrians are separated. Width still is everything. You can see the carriageway there is under 3 meters with a central strip to ensure that if people need to overtake, then they do so slowly. And the devil is in the detail. So a feature of Dutch streets is the clinkers, or the street pavers, which I believe Portugal is quite familiar with. I think that's me 8 years ago on the streets of possibly Cascais, cycling on the cobbles. Sorry, let's go back. And here you can see that small details like if people are expected to cycle on a certain side of the street, then you can see that they've actually smoothed the cobbles there. There we go. So, and that's everything. So just a quick notice that Mobicon has now got an online learning platform. And we'd love people to join us at Mobicon Academy, academy.mobicon.com. And I'd be happy to take questions at the end. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Jason, for that pretty comprehensive overview. You crammed a lot in 10 minutes, so well done. And I am now going to hand the floor to our third and final speaker, Leor Steinberg, who is the co-founder of Humankind. They're an urban planning agency in Rotterdam.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to try to share my presentation while speaking. Is it working? Do you see me? Yeah, perfect. Thanks everybody for the nice presentation. I'm going to take it forward after we learn why we need to invest in cycling in Portugal and what is needed to be done in a very comprehensive presentation by Jason. I'm going to share a little bit of how to do it and how to start tomorrow, which is something we are doing many times at Humankind. I took this picture last year when I was in Lisbon. I have to say that this morning when I looked for those pictures, I realized how much I miss Lisbon. It was lovely experience. And it's a shame that flights are not possible nowadays, but well, I will be back. And I mean, a lot of places in Lisbon are very walkable, and especially when you take the cars out of the streets. They're just filled up with pedestrians and cyclists. Especially these images from January, and the weather is beautiful compared to the Netherlands. I don't think that's an excuse. But I was staying at Rocio, next to Rocio station, next to the column of Pedro IV. I'm not sure what is the Portuguese word for that. And I thought it's a wonderful square, but every time I went out of my hotel trying to cross the road, I saw that there are like 3 lanes of cars going very fast. I don't know if it's already changed in the last 1 or 2 years. But I thought, okay, that's an example. I mean, we are 1 minute walking from a very walkable, nice street, and then we have a beautiful square that you cannot really cross to if you're a child or you just want to run into. And it reminded me same example, some example of a square in Groningen, the Netherlands. This is the Vismarkt, which is a square that used to be a parking lot, again with a big road around it. And this is how the square in this Dutch city looks today. It is car-free, it is a bicycle heaven, and it is attracting people from all ages to come and visit and enjoy this beautiful space. And this is a change that Groningen did 40 years ago, basically deciding to remove cars from the city center. And that's a decision that needs to be made in many cities, and especially in cities that are very old, but has such a great potential. This is another example from Groningen that used to be a road going through a park. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago actually, the referendum decided to remove the road and make it yet again a road, but only for bicycles, which is one of the busiest bicycle roads in the Netherlands, and I would say one of the most beautiful bicycle routes in the world. But the change was difficult, and even the referendum to change this road into this route was very difficult, even in a city like Groningen, which, as Ambassador Rooster mentioned, the Netherlands is a bicycle heaven, and even there it was difficult to convince people to make the change. And that's why when we work with cities at Humankind, we're trying to apply this idea of agile urbanism. We cannot make the change in one day, change everything. We need to go in an agile way, slowly, assess, design, implement, and then learn what happened from interventions or small changes, and then go forward, having all the time this vision of bicycle-friendly or people-friendly streets. We always think that it has to go together. And I would like to give 2 quick examples of how we do it. And that's maybe just lessons, one from the Netherlands, one from Israel, of how maybe Portuguese cities can go about, maybe learn from those ideas, and of course apply it with your local knowledge. So those are my examples. The first one is in Rotterdam. We've been working on the bicycle vision of the city. On the left is how the city used to be before it was bombed during the Second World War. And on the right is our illustration of how the future of the city could look like when we work from a vision. But part of this vision was not only thinking how the city can look in 20 years, it was let's start making the change now. And those are projects that we've been doing all around the city together with the municipality and our partners. And the idea was to try to change those streets already now, and then discuss with neighbors and with stakeholders how we can make it permanent, but doing so only when people already experience open streets, streets that are closed for cars, streets that are easier to cycle, streets with less parking. We've been doing quite a few colorful interventions, but this, I think, relevant to this talk is an example of very car-dominated street in the city center of Rotterdam, the Westkruiskade. And what we basically proposed here and applied together with the municipality is the application of a tactical bike lane. Basically, instead of trying to convince all shop owners to remove parking spaces forever, we said, let's first try it for a few months, see if it works, and only if it works, we can go forward. This is an example of a project that was a success because later on, shop owners that were against the bike lane were in favor of it, and currently there is a permanent bike lane installed in this street as a result of this experiment. So that's one example I like to give, and then I will finish up so I don't take so much time for the questions. Another example of our project in Tel Aviv. So another lovely city. I'm not sure if more beautiful than Lisbon, but that's where I grew up. So it is also a hot climate city. It's not as flat as in the Netherlands. And we've been working on, with local partners. We were part of the group that developed the bicycle strategy. We're talking about 300 kilometers of bicycles in the city in the coming 5 years, I believe, if I remember correctly. But you cannot start it tomorrow. You cannot just apply 300 kilometers. It's very difficult. You need to remove a lot of parking, close a lot of roads for cars. And this is an image of how we believe many streets in the city should look like in the future. So removing on the one side of the street a bicycle, a parking lane, and turn it into a bike lane. So this is just an illustration. But what you can see, that's part of the strategy that looks 5 and 10 years ahead, the city is already starting to applying. So taking this map, looking at places where it is already possible to apply them tomorrow, removing parking spaces. I'm talking about projects that the city has been doing overnight. So you can see that the pictures are dark. The city has been building hundreds of meters of bicycle lanes overnight, and neighbors just wake up to see those bicycle lanes there. I think that those lanes, of course, are not perfect, are bi-directional. I think that in the city center, they should be one-directional. But what you can see is that the city is committed to just try those things out with very cheap materials. We're not talking here about building for month and month. I'm talking about very cheap materials and very quick applications, and taking those lessons afterwards to turn them into a permanent solution. This is another picture from Lisbon. I don't know how it ended up here, but I hope that maybe next time I will be in Lisbon, I will see more protected bicycle infrastructure, and it will be easier to cycle there. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leor. Okay, we don't have a lot of time for questions, about 10 minutes, but let's get into it. There's been a few comments and questions in the chat box. The first is, and this will always come up when you talk about cycling outside of the Netherlands, is the question of terrain. And I know, Bernardo, you have some fairly strong opinions about how perhaps hilliness is overstated as a barrier to cycling, particularly in Lisbon. And so can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe how e-bikes and other technologies and strategies could be used to overcome that argument against building cycle lanes because there are hills?
Sure. Well, the comment comes from Guarda, which is Portugal's highest city in altitude. It's at an altitude, I think, that doesn't exist in Holland, at 1,000 odd meters. And that's right, it is a hilly city, but I've been to Guarda, and there are ways that you can make, and Lisbon is different from Guarda because Lisbon is 75% flat. Even though people speak about hilliness, the biggest barrier is in people's heads because this idea of hilliness. In Guarda, I'm not so sure. I don't think it's 75% flat. I think it's much less. But there are ways, shortcuts that could be made to make it easier for people who even use normal bicycles. As for electric bicycles with bike share, it's a great opportunity. Bike share systems with electric bikes could make it more universal. And good paths connecting places, streets with less traffic, with contraflows, I think are all great opportunities which streets without automobiles, which the city could take advantage of. And Guarda's connections outside of the city to some of the locations outside. I know some of the areas where the warehouses are and where stores are. Much of that is relatively flat. It actually becomes hilly when you come in close to the city.
Okay. And I think there's perhaps an irony that here, at least here in the Netherlands, e-bikes are so prevalent, and in fact, the last 2 years, electric bikes have outsold traditional bikes. So even despite the fact that country as flat as a pancake, e-bikes are used quite widely here as a range extender and as a tool to get more people into cycling. Jason, can you talk a little bit about the design considerations when we're talking about more electric bikes on the streets, when it comes to perhaps vehicles that are going a little bit faster compared to a traditional bike, and what are Dutch engineers and planners having to do to take that extra traffic into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly still very much a developing field as e-bikes become more and more popular. But the main considerations are the speed. The e-bikes go at a more consistent speed, which is typically higher than, or can be higher than most people are traveling on an electric bike. And also that consistency of speed as well is a factor in the design. You need to be aware of the fact that people are maintaining a speed rather than the usual fluctuations. So cycle paths are getting wider, which not only facilitates great use of e-bikes, but also different types of inclusive cycle as well. So that's another thing to consider. A lot of e-bikes are also cargo bikes, and then even within the Netherlands, there are, as I said, it's an emerging field. So there are engineers are testing new designs, new road markings, new surface types, and also faster routes. So as you said, Chris, e-bikes are being used as range extenders, and that has an implication on the types of journeys that people are making, and the length of journeys that people are making as well. And that has an influence on the type of route the routes that are being built.
Thanks, Jason. There was another question about freight deliveries. Leor, is that a topic that you have to tackle when you're developing these master plans for various cities? Is the access and timing of freight?
Yeah, I think that's what's so nice about concept like sustainable urban mobility planning. So you don't look only on the bicycle by itself, but you realize that if you start looking at the city as a place that needs to attract less motor traffic, you can solve a lot of problems at once. So, for example, as the city of Groningen that I showed in the beginning attracted more and more bicycles to the point that 65% of the trips in the city center are made with a bicycle. They now need to solve the problem that there is no space for big trucks in the city, and they are proposing different ways to attract to bring packages to the city. So they are using e-bike cargo bikes, and they are having sort of time slots for big trucks to come, which are normally very early in the morning or very late in the evening.
Thank you. And there was another question about the shark's teeth road markings. Jason, can you talk a little bit about how shark's teeth are used in the Netherlands? And then there was a question about how to get them translated into a Portuguese context. So I'd also like to hear from Bernardo about what you think are the transferability of shark's teeth and the possibility of starting to use them in Portuguese cities. But first, Jason, please.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just a sort of an immigrant thing when you arrive in the Netherlands, you fall in love with shark's teeth, or whether it's just a sort of a geeky mobility planning thing. But yeah, I love shark's teeth. I love how versatile they are, and this is coming from the fact that I'm from the UK, and we have different markings that aren't quite as useful. So if anyone isn't familiar with shark's teeth markings, they're triangles that indicate where you should give way, and they can be used on cycle tracks or just as much as on the carriageway. And they're able, it enables you to indicate really clearly when people should and shouldn't stop. Of course, then they're not used exclusively because they do provide quite clear priority, and that's something that you might not always want. So for example, a junction of two minor residential streets, you wouldn't expect to see shark's teeth markings, because in the Netherlands we have a system of traffic giving way to traffic from the right. But yeah, they're used in so many different contexts. I can't speak to the exact dimensions that are required, but I know that in the different countries have very different regulations, and they might be more or less rigid. But I really like the flexibility of shark's teeth markings.
Regarding Portuguese legislation, they're not in the road signage, but there are road signs. Many are similar to the rest of Europe, and including the UK. We just ride on the right side of the road since 1927. And the signs there are giveaways for cycleways, which aren't even respected by many of the municipalities. They don't introduce them, but it's foreseen. And there was an attempt once, I think a local government placed shark's teeth, but they did it the other way around. Instead of being for the cars to yield, it seemed to be for the pedestrians. But if the road signage was followed, the national road signage, the recent edition, but even since 1998 for bicycle crossings, for example, that would already be great. That would be possible. We do use, in Lisbon, what we did, working in the pilot project, there were issues with the National Road Safety Authority. So basically I did a responsibility declaration, and we proved that it was used in various places. It was fundamented. So someone who wanted to take them out would have to assume responsibility, not for shark's teeth, but to place advanced bike zones that were already foreseen in the municipal manual. So the municipality engaged with the National Road Authority, and things were discussed with them, and there was a pilot project implemented. So if there's political will, all of these technical solutions, we're talking about details regarding painting, they could be implemented, but someone has to accompany that technically. We did it with the pilot project in Lisbon, and Lisbon has managed to introduce some new elements, but there's lots to do, and there's regulation. National regulation is quite clear. It's not much of an issue. I think it's the political will is the issue.
Yes, definitely. And someone's pointed out in the chat box that shark's teeth have been used in Porto's pop-up cycle paths more recently. So I guess the cities are going to have to take a lead before they perhaps get embraced. Yeah. Okay. We've got time for one last question, and that's around emergency vehicles and the width of streets. Jason, you emphasized that width matters, but I always get this question myself in streets and lanes that are only 2.6 meters wide. How do Dutch cities manage fire trucks and police cars and the like? And so how is that taken into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, it's narrow streets isn't something unique to the Netherlands. So I think a way that the Dutch deal with it is, first of all, having quite clear emergency service routes mapped out. So, emergency service vehicles aren't necessarily expected to be able to use all streets equally, because they don't need to. And secondly, the majority of the journey made by emergency service vehicles will be on distributor roads that allow them to travel at greater speeds. And it's only a small proportion and that final part of their journey that they would need to access residential streets and narrower streets. So once they do arrive at, they're already close to their destination. And of course, you need to take into consideration the available space in design, but it doesn't mean that all residential streets have to have enormous turning radii and huge widths, because at that point they're already close to their destination, and they can still use the available space, but slowly and carefully, because they're already pretty much there.
Great. Okay, I know I said one last question, but I'm going to have one last question because it's such a good one, and it's directed towards Leor. So someone has asked that, express their frustration that there are still political roadblocks to making change in Portuguese cities. And someone has asked, besides riding a bike, what can they do to change this on a personal level, on a local level, to make change in their city?
Wow, that's a difficult question, and we are over time, so I will try to keep it short. It doesn't seem that there is, clearly there is political problem, but it seems like there is also a lot of demand, if I understood the Portuguese of Bernardo, and a lot of activism toward it. I think that the best way is to push politicians in one way, and the other way is that I did see the rise of e-scooters use, at least in Lisbon, and this is something that also happened in Tel Aviv. So we don't only need to speak about the bicycle, we can also show that a lot of e-scooters are being used on sidewalks, which creates a very unsafe situations. And maybe if we will invest in infrastructure and safe routes, for those, it will also help bicycles, it will also help pedestrians. So we need to show how it's not something that we do only for cyclists, but also for all road users.
Thanks, Leor. So I'm just going to wrap up our session with a couple of announcements. Just so everyone is aware, we've been asked about e-certificates for the participation in this session, which we're happy to provide. If you want to email me personally at chris.bruntlett@dutchcycling.nl, we will do that, create one for you. I also want to make you aware of a promotion we have coming up starting November 6th, and that is we'll be offering the Crow manual, the design manual for bicycle traffic, which is widely regarded as the Bible for bicycle facility design, is going to be on sale for €99 starting on the 16th of November, running until the end of the year, until December 31st. So watch our social media channels and the crowplatform.com website for more information in regards to that. Our experts have kindly offered their time for some complimentary hour-long one-on-one coaching sessions as a follow-up to some of the topics we discussed in this webinar. So they will happily sit down with you in your municipality and discuss a specific challenge that you're facing, and provide their expertise and knowledge in regards to that. We only have a limited number of these sessions available, and there is one condition that you must bring along an elected official from your city, in the hopes that we can get them on board with the change that you're trying to make to your streets. Last but not least, we're working on, as the ambassador suggested, a series of webinars in the build-up to VeloCity in June. The next one is tentatively scheduled to take place on the 4th of February, and will be on the theme of bikeonomics. One of our participants, Decisio, they're a research agency based in Amsterdam, are doing a lot of groundbreaking work in the field of social cost-benefit analyses, and showing that investing in cycling provides a return on investment that's significant. And the Netherlands Embassy in Lisbon has kindly offered to potentially co-finance one of these cost-benefit analysis stories or studies, or a series of them. If your municipality is interested, please do reach out to us, and we can make an introduction and start a conversation in regards to that. But thank you so much for your attention. It's been a really informative session, a really great discussion. As I said, this will be archived on YouTube in the future. Please do share it within your networks. And we do look forward to seeing you in February of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you.
Obrigado. Thank you.